por nuestras comunidades en Estados Unidos, pero también un instrumento de empoderamiento político, social, cultural de nuestras comunidades en Estados Unidos. Good afternoon. As I see this room, I'm always reminded of what happened to a gladiator in imperial Rome who is sent out into the arena. The cages to the lions are thrown open. The lions rush into the arena. The gladiator goes up to the lions, whispers something into their ear, and the lions run away. And the emperor, extremely vexed that the entertainment for that day has disappeared, summons the gladiator to the imperial box and demands to know what the gladiator told the lions. And the gladiator looks at the emperor and says, well, I actually told the lions that there would be speeches with their food. So I will try and be as brief as I can. Speeches and food never mix. But I thought this was a very good opportunity to talk to you about, I think, one of the most important challenges that Mexico, the United States, and the Hispanic community in general, your great constituency, faces today in the United States. And yes, there are a lot of issues. If you look at the US-Mexico relationship, there are many, many issues that play a key role in our bilateral agenda. But none is as important and none will have the impact that getting immigration right on both sides of the border will have for the security, prosperity, and economic well-being of both our peoples. And it would seem that the ambassador is drinking too much Kool-Aid in Washington, because everything would seem to suggest that immigration and immigration reform today are politically dead. That a few months from the elections in this country, this is political poison, no one's going to address the issue. And I would agree, I think we won't see significant, comprehensive immigration reform, unfortunately, before the presidential elections in the United States in 2012. But that does not mean that we have a unique opportunity to try and reset the dialogue, push that famous reset button, and change perceptions and change realities on the ground. And I'll tell you why. First, I'm going to give you what I think is happening in terms of policy. I think there are three policy drivers that will have a profound impact on this debate. Then I'll talk about the political speed bump that does exist as we move forward. And then finally, what is the socioeconomic reality, the big red light on the street that will, at least for the time being, impede progress, but which we have to take on to be able to change significantly the direction of this debate. What are the three policy drivers that I think allow us to start rethinking immigration and immigration policy on both sides of the US-Mexico border? Number one, despite what the pundits and some of the radio talk show hosts and some of the state governors and governments in this country would like to suggest, migration flows from Mexico into the United States have fallen dramatically. And this is not the data of the Mexican embassy or the Mexican ambassador. There's a very important Princeton University study that just came out, and there's a very significant Pew study that just came out that point to two very powerful changes. Number one, in 2011, by the end of this year, we will have seen zero net migration from Mexico to the United States. And since 2006 to this year, we will have seen a 40% decrease in undocumented migrants across the border in Mexico. Why is this happening? Obviously, as most things in life, there isn't a clean-cut answer. It's a combination of things, but there are a number of things that we need to understand clearly. Obviously, border enforcement has had an impact. There's more border enforcement, therefore it is much harder to cross the border, and therefore people are less willing to try and come across. The second factor is that the economy in America has been in the slumps, in the doldrums for quite some time. And it's not a surprise that housing and the services industry, which is where most of our community goes to work, are not growing. But More importantly, I think, is what is happening on the Mexican side of the border. And this is what very few people in America understand. And that is, for the first time in Mexican history, demographics and economic performance in Mexico are changing dynamics on the border. We're becoming an older country. The United States' birth rate last year was 2.2. Do you know what Mexico's birth rate for last year was? 2.1. We are becoming an older nation just as you are. And in 20-25 years, our demographics are going to look a lot like yours. So demographic change is happening at a very quick pace in Mexico. Number two, Mexico's economy, contrary to what is happening elsewhere in the world after 2009, has been growing at a 5% rate of growth, with 3% unemployment, 3% inflation, and 4.1 unemployment. I bet this country would give 2 arms and 2 legs to be able to have that level of growth and those numbers in unemployment. And so, increasingly, the Mexican economy is starting to grow and to provide adequate jobs so people don't have to come across the border in search of a better paid job. And the other factor that is playing a fundamental part in this is that Mexico has put in play, now for the past 50 years, what is probably the most successful poverty alleviation program on the face of the earth. It's called Oportunidades. It's changed in name. It started as a program called Solidaridad, and then it was rebaptized as Progresa. It is now called Oportunidades. And what does this program do? It provides conditional cash transfer to the female head of household, contingent on 2 things happening. 1, she and the kids are going to their medical appointments and getting their vaccines on time, and B, the kids are enrolled in school with passing grades. If either of these 2 drivers are not complied with, the microcredits are withheld. And this program has had such an important impact in creating entrepreneurship that it has brought 40 million people out of extreme poverty in Mexico over the past 15 years. So these factors combined are having a profound impact on undocumented flows across the border. More importantly, is that this country needs to understand that even if Lou Dobbs went down on his knees to the Virgin of Guadalupe Shrine in Mexico City to ask for excess labor to come up to Napa Valley or to the hotels of Las Vegas or to do roofing in Long Island, in 20-25 years, that labor force won't be there. Because if Mexico does continue to grow at these rates of growth, we will be able to anchor these talented, bold, entrepreneurial women and men who had been crossing the border into the United States in search of a better paid job. And let's face it, again, despite what some of the pundits would like to suggest, Mexico's loss is your gain. Mexico cannot grow if we can't hold on to these talented, entrepreneurial, brave women and men who are crossing the border in search of a better paid job. We won't be able to bridge the economic asymmetry between Mexico and the United States if we don't anchor these people back home in Mexico. So despite what some would like to suggest, it behooves Mexico to ensure that every single Mexican that crosses the border to the United States does so legally and through a designated port of entry. The second change that is happening, and that has a very important impact on how we reset the dialogue on immigration in the United States, is the U.S. Census. Just look at those numbers. Many of us in this room, and I see very old, familiar faces who've been in the trenches for a very, very long time, for decades have been speaking about the coming wave of Latino political empowerment in the United States. Well, ladies and gentlemen, amigos, it is finally happening. 2008 was the first presidential election in this country where the Latino vote decided the election. 4 states that voted for one party in the previous presidential election voted for a different party in 2008. And those 4 states are Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and Florida. What do these 4 states have in common? That they have the highest percentage of first-time voters, and oh, no surprise, 73% of those new voters are Latinos. This census, what this census tells us is that the empowerment, the real political empowerment of the Latino community has finally arrived. And this also has a profound impact on how politicians in Washington and elsewhere engage with the Latino community and pay the consequences or reap the benefits of working hand in hand with the Latino community in the United States. And then the final driver that is having a profound impact on how do we reset the conversation on immigration in the United States is that despite the Alabamas and despite the Arizonas, we are not seeing a so-called tsunami of migrants returning to Mexico. They're staying put for obvious reasons. If you're the head of a household who had to pay anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 to no longer the mom and pop coyote smugglers who've been on this border working for decades, but very violent, transnational organized crime that has muscled its way into the business of human smuggling, and you're not able to cross on your first attempt as you were able to do 10, 15 years ago, the incentives of going back and forth as people used to 15 years ago have completely evaporated. So people are staying put. And despite the Arizonas and the Alabamas of the world, what they're doing is they're moving from Arizona and they're moving from Alabama, but they're going to other parts of the United States. And that's why we have Mexico has opened its 50th consulate in the United States. You know where? Anchorage, Alaska. We have 25,000 Mexican workers in the canning industry in Alaska. Because of the effects of some of these punitive and racist laws that are being approved in certain states of the Union, you see internal migration and internal displacement in the United States, but you're not seeing them return to Mexico. These are the three drivers that I think can start changing some of the policy debates and the policy awareness of where we need to, how we need to rethink immigration. Because at the end of the day, yes, it is about the rule of law. And I understand that this is a very toxic issue, and this is a very divisive issue in America today that has polarized public opinion in the United States. But what we need to underscore to people on both sides of the ideological divide in the United States, yes, it's about the rule of law, but more importantly, it's an economic imperative. Mexico and the United States will not be able to grow if we don't ensure that a labor-abundant country living next to a capital-abundant country makes sense of this and work to find a way that respecting the rights in a legal way, in an orderly way, can provide willing employees and willing employers to come together in a legal, transparent way, and that we can bring 5 million people from all over the world out of the shadows, provide them with a document, provide them with a name, and even if the concern is just about security, as some would suggest, to know who these people are, so that we're sure that they are not a threat to the safety of the United States or Mexico. But here's where we're going to face a political speed bump, which is that this conversation, sadly, will not occur before we have an election in the United States. President Obama and the current administration, or even some Republicans who support comprehensive immigration reform, simply do not have the votes in Congress today to get a comprehensive immigration bill passed. That is the sad, tragic, but realistic view from Washington. And sadly, not even something as important as the DREAM Act, a bill that should be a no-brainer for politicians of both parties in understanding how you need to tap into the potential that these great kids have for the future of North America. Not even the DREAM Act is probably going to see the day of light until we've had an electoral process in the United States. That's the political speed bump. The red light is that if we add to this the profound economic dislocation that we've seen in the United States in 2009, this is going to be a very hard fight to fight. Because if people out there, not in New York City, not in Las Vegas, not in LA, not in Chicago, but in Atoka, Oklahoma, and in Fargo, and in the main streets of America, if people are still hurting and if jobs still cannot be had, and if increasingly parents and grandparents have the sensation that their kids and their grandkids are not going to be better off than they were when they were growing up, this debate is going to be very hard to win. But nonetheless, we have to use the bully pulpit to explain to Americans and to explain to Mexicans why this debate needs to be won, why it is critically important for the economic well-being of both our countries. It behooves us both to be able to convince Mexicans and Americans that this is a critically important debate and discussion. What are the policy implications of what I've just laid out for you? I think there are a number of things that we could start doing, and I'll start by the easiest stuff and end up with the hardest stuff. So I'll go from easy to hard, but these are some of the things that we could be doing despite this lay of the land I have shared with you as to how I think immigration and the immigration debate in the United States will proceed in the coming months, sort of in the short to medium term. The first thing that we could be doing, that we're doing, is certifying labor skills for migrants. And we, the Mexican government, have been doing it with state and local authorities. We go to Chicago, we go to New York City, we work with unions, SEIU, for example, in New York and Chicago, in ensuring that youngsters who want to become an apprentice as a chef, or as a cook, or as a dishwasher, or as a carpenter, or as a plumber, can certify their skills with state and local authorities. So that we make sure that A, they're working with the protection of the labor rights regardless of their status, and this is something that I'm very proud to be working with Secretary Solis, who has been a champion in working with us in our consular network in ensuring that regardless of the migratory status of Mexican and Mexican Americans in the United States, we are ensuring that their labor rights are protected. So how can we expand this certification of labor skills for migrants is something that we're already doing, which is low-hanging fruit, and which is having a profound impact on the well-being and on the legal and civil rights of so many migrants in the United States. The second thing that we could be doing, that we're doing, this especially with the federal government, is closer policy coordination to confront organized crime seeking to muscle its way into human trafficking. And how we're working on the border to try and defang these very violent, these very aggressive organizations that, because of the impact that they have received in terms of their ability to bring drugs into the US market, do what any business does. They do hostile takeovers and acquisitions. They're spreading out into other illicit criminal activities: extortion, kidnapping, ransom, human trafficking. And this is where we have to be extremely aggressive and extremely observant to shut these organizations down on both sides of the border. This isn't just happening on the Mexican side of the border. People get trafficked through Mexico and across the border, but these people are brought by organizations on this side of the border. And many women and many minors end up in prostitution rings in Las Vegas, in LA, in Atlanta, in New York City. And we have to work with federal authorities, we have to work with police departments, with governors, with attorney generals in breaking down these chains of human trafficking that crisscross the Americas. The third thing that we can be doing is ensuring that we have successful integration programs for migrants in the United States. That we can ensure that they successfully integrate into the social fabric of America. That NGOs and grassroots organizations and cultural groups and Rotary clubs and soccer clubs and baseball clubs all play a part in providing them with a, sorry, I'm destroying some reporters' tape recorder here, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's still working. I'm getting excited. That we continue to ensure that our migrant communities are integrating into the fabric of America. Samuel Huntington, who some of you may remember, wrote a very inflammatory, from my point of view, a very inflammatory book about his argument was that Latinos were not assimilating, did not want to assimilate into the fabric of America. It's not that they don't want to assimilate. It's the hurdles that they are facing to integrate into American society are nowhere close to what other communities, other historical migration patterns faced in this country. Italians, Greeks, Germans, Jews from Central and Eastern Europe. Within a generation, they had basically successfully integrated into the fabric of American society. It has now been since 1986 that this country saw the last immigration reform that allowed people to regularize the status. And so you have now for more than 3 decades a diverse, very large Latino community from all over the Americas that is here without papers, that has no road, no path to integrate, no way to legalize their status. So we have to continue to think how from civil society, from the bottom up, how we can work and engage with groups like yours, with media, with think tanks, with business chambers. How do we ensure that they integrate successfully into American society? The fourth thing that we could be doing is we have to think of gender-specific strategies. Why? Because of the dynamics that I was describing for you on the border, what we're seeing is more and more women are coming across the border to join their husbands, partners who've left and who, because of the lack of ability to go back and forth, have stayed put. And so now we're seeing a very important increase in women traveling alone, coming across the border, and they immediately become prey to organized crime. So how can we develop gender-specific policies to guarantee the safety and ensure the rights of these women who are crossing the border into the United States? The next policy consideration that we should be thinking of is how do we harness these competitive advantages that exist in North America? The only factor that would provide the United States and Mexico with the ability to compete with the likes of China and India and other global economic players is if we understand that our economies are completely integrated. Very few people in this country get it that on a daily basis, Mexico and the United States trade $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion a day of trade. Any day, we have 75,000 trucks that reach our border in both directions. On any given day, we have 1 million legal border crossings between Mexico and the United States. And what many Americans don't understand is how important Mexico is to the economic well-being of the United States. We are your second buyer of exports. For every dollar that China buys from the United States today, Canada and Mexico buy $9 in U.S. exports. And depending on what your region of expertise is, if you think of Europe, Mexico buys more U.S. exports than the UK, the Netherlands, Italy, and France put together. If you think of Latin America, we buy more than all of Latin America together of U.S. exports. And if you're focused on the new sexy Asia Pacific, we buy more U.S. exports than China and Japan combined. So whoever misses the economic importance of working to further strengthen jobs created through trade between the United States and Mexico is missing the boat. Finally, I think that this is going to be the toughest challenge. I think because of what I've just described for you, the changes in immigration patterns from Mexico to the United States, we have in the medium term an opportunity to change the public discourse in America as it relates to immigration. This is where our reset button lies. If we can make sure that people understand that Mexico is not interested in using migration flows as a safety valve, that we need these people to grow, that Mexico is working hand in hand with the United States to ensure that our border is secure against potential terrorists or organized crime, that we need to understand that migrants are a boon and a strength to this country and to both our nations, that we are creating a truly transnational, trans-border community. Just go to the border border and see what's going on both sides of our common border. If you take the US border states with Mexico's northern states and bunch them together, we would have the fourth largest economy on the face of the earth. And it's having a profound impact on society, on culture. When I was a diplomatic tadpole at the Mexican embassy in the 90s and we were negotiating NAFTA, many in Mexico were concerned that through NAFTA, Mexico would lose its cultural, historical identity, and that we would sort of be sucked up by Hollywood, American culture, etc. I think one of the most important and fascinating facets that we have seen as a result of this growing interaction between our border communities is that there is a new culture that is being born that is both American and Mexican. It's a truly trans-border community relationship. And there's one very powerful example that I like to point out. Look at gastronomy, look at cuisine, and look at the role that gastronomy has played in bringing these two countries together. I don't know if you know, but for the last 2 years running, on Super Bowl day, more guacamole and salsa have been sold than ketchup in the history of the Super Bowls in the United States. There's a fundamental shift taking place, and we need to understand that we need to embrace them. This is why this xenophobic and nativist stench that is coming out of places like Alabama today is extremely worrisome, because it is poisoning the wellspring of values, of understanding, of common purpose between Mexico and the United States. I'm the son of conflict refugees fleeing fascism and fleeing genocide that came to Mexico before the Second World War. And I'll be very blunt, I may be glib, but I think it's very powerful. I had never seen what you're seeing today in Alabama, of policemen asking for pay. Octavio Paz, one of Mexico's Nobel laureates, wrote many years ago an essay in which he tried to explain why the United States and Mexico had a tough time getting along. And he wrote that the problem was that Mexicans didn't know how to speak up, and Americans didn't know how to listen. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that I think has changed in recent years is that Mexico and Mexicans are finally speaking up, and Americans are tuning in. And nothing could bode better for the future of this bilateral relationship, despite the challenges that we face, than this fundamental shift that has occurred at the society level between our two nations and our